Do you ever feel like you have to do better or do more, or just how you are isn't good enough? Well, you're in luck because today's episode, we're going to talk about that exact topic. This is the Existential Stoic Podcast. I'm
That's
Randy.
lucky.
That's Danny. What's going on, Danny?
What's up, Randy?
Danny, has it ever happened in, your few decades you've been here where you felt like you had to do more or better in order to just be good enough?
Oh my God, all the time. I think we hold ourselves to like a standard that's way above everybody else. Like we'll say, just to give like a common example, but like an A minus is, or a B is fine for everybody else. But for us, you want an A plus, right? For everything and all things. And it's like it's so much pressure put on you. And I don't know how much of that is expectations too from the past. It's hard to tell, how much is tied to like our growing up in social conditions, but still, yeah.
Dude, and then we have all these examples on social media of these people who are like the 0.0001%. And we think that we have to measure up to them in every
Yeah.
aspect of their life. Like they're a complete degenerate in everything except for they earn a lot of money. And all of a sudden we think, well, we have to earn a lot of money and be a great parent and be a great, like
Yeah.
all this other stuff.
And
Yeah.
have perfect dogs and have this
Yeah.
and have a giant
Mm-hmm.
house. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah, so I was reading this week from Massimo's book, The Field Guide to the Happy Life, and there was an excerpt that I'm going to read here that kind of touched on this, and it was very interesting. So I figured I'd give a little story time first, read this, and then we can comment on it.
Nice. That sounds good.
Okay,
I like story time.
so this is number 37 in that book if you want to read along from home. But it says, we all play several roles in life, but suppose you have decided to play a role that is not appropriate for you or beyond your abilities. If you were an actor, you would have ruined the play for the spectators, the other actors, and yourself. So consider carefully what projects you engage in and whether you are suitable for them. And by the same token, be sure not to neglect some other projects for which you are in fact well suited.
I like that.
Yeah, so this one kind of like every once in a while when you read something, it kind of like smacks you across the face and says like
Yeah.
wake up, like what are you doing?
What are you doing?
Yeah, this one hit me because like I definitely am oh I'm in that like constant thing where I have to do better, I have to be better, I have to be like perfect across every area of my life. But what it's saying here is like if you're an actor and you try and play a role that's not appropriate for you or beyond your abilities, you actually ruin the play for everyone else, all the other actors, all the people watching it, all the everything. So it's kind of
Yeah.
like you trying to be something other than what you are just ruins it for everybody. So why bother?
It does. And it ruins it for you too. And I think, there's a distinction to be made between like pushing yourself versus trying something you're not really meant to do? And I think this is hard though, because this also means like knowing yourself, which is difficult, right? And like knowing, having a reasonable like assessment of your abilities, your skills, your interests, your passions, what matters to you. I mean, all that's tied up in this, which makes it very difficult too. I think that's one of the reasons why, the Stoics and Massimo both are suggesting it, right? Which is that we need to be kind of aware of what we're capable of and then do things that align with that because that's where we'll shine, and we'll do the best.
Yeah. It's a tricky one because on one hand you have like the tryhards, and then on the other hand you have the dudes just like smoking pot and playing Halo all day. So it's like, you got to strike the balance between there. I find it funny, like the golden mean, when it comes down to everything, you got to strike the mean.
You do. You have to find that balance, right? Because you can't, if you don't do anything, there's going to be no opportunities. There's going to be nothing like worthwhile that you want to do. But if you push too hard, you never enjoy anything. You never really get good at anything. Because I'm sure you've been in that position too, where you want to do really good at stuff. So you jump from one thing to the next, trying things out, but not really committing to anything. I think a lot of people get stuck in that, and you just kind of like aren't really good enough to do anything in it. So it's like you're wasting time. And it's very hard to find what we need and what we want.
It's very difficult to say no in like this world of abundant opportunities. Because like
Yeah.
I find myself caught there right now where there's so many things that I want to do, and then there's already so many things I'm involved in that like I was looking at just the things I'm already involved in, and it's like almost impossible for me to keep up with all of them. And then there's other things that I want to do on top of that, and it's just, uh, yeah,
Join
I
the
think I'm
club.
just,
Yeah. It gets hard. No, it does. Yeah, it gets really hard. It's like trying to figure out like where, and it's hard because we said it before so many times, but you can do anything, but you can't do everything. And it's like there's that on the one hand, I think there's that fear of like if I don't say yes, I'm missing out on an opportunity, or I'm missing out on building a relationship or whatever that might become something later, or might really turn into something later. But on the other side, it's like, you only have so much time in a day, and balancing that is really difficult. It is.
Okay, so here's what comes to mind when you say that, because I get that exact thing where I feel like I'm missing out on an opportunity, and I have such a hard time saying no in those situations where I feel like I'm
Yeah.
missing going to miss out on an opportunity. But like sometimes it occurs where I'm out with some people who are like excessively overweight, and they order this dish and it's gigantic, and they're like, oh, I'm full, but I got to eat the whole thing. There are starving kids in Africa, and it's rude to leave food over. And I'm like, maybe that was the case 50 years ago. It's not the case anymore. Like, yes, there's always going to be starving kids in Africa, but it's not because this food didn't get there. It's because there's geopolitical issues there that didn't
Yeah.
allow for the
There's
food.
a lot of other
But
complex things going on in the
yeah, but
world.
I
Yeah.
gotta start looking at it myself. Like I'm doing the same thing, but with opportunities and all these things in life where I'm just trying to gorge myself because I'm already full. Like that's
Yeah.
it. And I'm still trying to gorge myself, being like, but there's a starving kid in Africa. I need to eat this.
It's the same. That's actually a good analogy though, because it's the same feeling, right? It's that feeling of like you're gonna miss out or you can't waste this thing that you have now. So you feel like you have to say yes. And it's like just overcommitting yourself doesn't do any good though, right? It does ruin the play. You're not gonna have time to put in the effort that you need to really do it well. I think that's a really hard thing too, is like we all know, like I mean, I don't know, like we all know, like when we start something new, like a new endeavor, it's hard at first, but it generally gets easier over time because the more you do anything, right, it gets easier. You get better at doing those things. They get routine becomes faster. So like it'll take less time in the future, but in the immediate present, it's like it takes a lot of time, and you have to have that time to put in to make it a worthwhile endeavor, right? And that's the hard part.
It's a tricky thing because it always seems to take longer than it should. But then when
Yeah,
you look back, you're like, wow, look at all that progress that happened.
yeah.
But it always seems like it should happen way faster than it
We're
does.
terrible at evaluating, like, I think, how long things take. We're terrible at evaluating progress. We think nothing happens, but then we look back and we see all these things that change. It's like we're really bad at evaluating that. And I think we're bad at like giving ourselves a bar for measuring success. So that coupled together makes it really hard. And I think that's what the Stoics were talking about, like knowing yourself more, focusing on character, and doing things that you do them well rather than half-assed or partially or realizing that you took on way too much and then having to quit, because you can't do it. Better
Mhm.
not get involved at all, right? In a certain sense.
Yeah, I thought so. I'm reading that book, Lives of the Stoics, right now, and it's pretty interesting because uh,
Who
there
wrote
was
that
not
one?
the Ryan Holiday.
Oh, right, right, right. I remember seeing that.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
and so it's interesting because, like, I up until I was reading this, I thought that like the Stoics kind of united commonly on themes, but not at all. Like they had their groups, their divisions, all types of stuff. There were some people who were just being obnoxious just for the fact of it, and yeah, all types of stuff.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like anything else, they were the Stoics, like it's funny because when we say like the Stoics, yeah, I think there's a tendency to think like, a group of people that existed in the past that were all together talking and formulated these ideas at once instead of like really a slow progression over time, over hundreds of years, really. I mean, and so many different individuals, many different places, geographic locations, and just like all of that amounts to, yeah, not a lot of agreement. But you do see it,
Mhm.
you do see, I think, a general like refining, I guess, of the theory over time as they progress, because they're responding to each other, they're responding to past,
You
arguments, things
know,
like that.
another thing that I thought was really interesting in this. So like so far, it talked about a few. I'm only maybe like a quarter of the way through the book, so there's only talked about a few of the beginning ones. But like they started their studies or their philosophy, their like studying philosophy pretty late in life. Like Cleanthes, it's postulated maybe he didn't even start till he was 50. And I remember hearing about that. Maybe I don't remember if it was Socrates or someone who was saying how like the beginning of your life, you work in the military, and then after that, you're in politics, and then no, then it's raising a family, then it's something philosophy, and then I don't know. Anyways, but
Something like
philosophy is
that. Yeah.
towards the end of life, and so like I think it's kind of comical nowadays how we take life advice, which is basically philosophy, from very young people have no experience because
Yeah.
all of a sudden they're like super successful, like all these like very young pop stars and whatever else who all the life coaches that are super young and don't have experience, and it's like, and then we throw the old people to the wind and just be like, go stay in a retirement home.
Well, yeah, the reverse was the case, you know. I mean, people made it, to an older age back then. They were probably doing well, right? And like I think if you think about it, like most of us, if we're honest with ourselves and look back, we weren't mature when we were 18 or 20. We weren't, and we didn't have shit together. We don't even know ourselves at that age. So in a certain sense, I think philosophy is a lot easier when you get into like your 30s because you're more like you know yourself more, you know the world more, you've experienced more, you have more to work with to make these kinds of judgments, assessments, and to figure out what works best for you, you know? And I think that, yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. And we don't do that now because we want to, we want to think there's something special about these people that made them successes. We don't want to say that it was chance, luck, circumstances. And yes,
100%.
yeah, they brought, of course, I'm not diminishing anyone's talent or efforts, but there is a certain being in the right place at the right time type thing that is a huge factor to success that people don't often talk about.
Yeah. So I told you we were talking before this episode about the book that I'm reading, uh, Yellowface, which is basically about like plagiarism and a bunch of stuff like that. But there's like some passages in the book that are just like classic because this book is all about like being a try hard on social media.
Yeah.
And so there's a passage in the book where I'm just paraphrasing, but she's like racked with guilt for plagiarizing. Her life is in shambles, but she's made some money from this. And she's like, by all external means, I'm a success. So I don't see what the problem is. And it's like your life is falling apart. And it's like, but you still think you're a success? Like, how broken is that system?
Yeah, but that's what I mean, that's the funny thing is like we literally think, and again, I think it's because like, well, capitalism, obviously, and I also think money's just an easy metric. Like, like I don't have to know you. If I see you walking down the street and I see you have like a really fancy bag, I don't need to know anything about you to know like that bag probably costs a couple grand, right? And if you're walking around with that, that means you probably have money, right? I mean, that's just essentially that's the whole thing of it is showing off.
Well,
Doesn't mean you do have money. I know
yeah,
that's the funny
exactly.
part,
It
right?
means you
Because
spend money on that bag.
you spend money on the bag, so it could be all in debt and stuff. But we take that as a social cue that they're successful. It doesn't give us any indication of the rest of their life, how they're doing. Do they have a well-rounded life? Are they even happy? But it's kind of similar to how like we use GDP as a measure of a country's success. That tells you nothing about how most people are doing. It doesn't tell you about happiness. It just tells you about how much money is being churned around in that society.
True,
And we use it for everything, you know? It's a shame.
true. So, um, I mean, I guess from that quote that we were talking about earlier, it did give me a chance to like pause and reflect and be like, what am I wasting energy on effectively?
Yeah.
Because I'm trying to do all these things and basically I'm churning the water. Because if you can't put enough effort into a certain thing, like if you try and spread your effort out through a whole bunch of things, you're just going to get
Yeah.
nothing done. You're basically just churning the water. But like if you can focus your energy on a few things, you can improve on that. And so it got me to thinking like, what things am I wasting my energy on? And the part how it says in there, like instead of wasting your energy on that, figure out what you're better suited to and consider pursuing that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good one because like I've been thinking about that too. Like, how can I like do the things I'm doing, but reduce my focus to what's really important so I can do those things well now. Sometimes it's just planning, you know? I think sometimes it is just like sitting down and like even if you want to do something, prioritizing how you're going to do it so you have a plan. Because I think there's a lot of our faults is a lot of us get into, especially when it's not like structured like learning or work or something, we get into things and we don't have a strict plan, so it's all over the place, you know? So I think part of it is just knowing our limits, knowing planning, and like what we can actually do or contribute that's going to be valuable overall. But that
Yeah.
is hard to know. It is hard to be
And
honest.
when it's unstructured, it's so hard to know that it's actually going to pay off. Like you have to have such intense faith that this is
Yeah.
amounting to something. Because you can apply for like, some program out of school and you'll be like, well, even if I dick around for 2 years or 4 years, eventually I'll have a degree and that'll mean something. But like when it's self-directed, you're like, you just gotta cross your fingers and hope. And granted, it does, if you put in the work, like usually it does turn out. But it's just it feels a lot riskier.
Yeah. It's funny, like Anne always makes fun of me for being like overly optimistic all the time, but I was like, I don't know how else I could do anything. Like if I don't have faith that it's going to work out, I wouldn't bother doing it anyway. So it's like kind of like it is like a partially lie to yourself, but it's like a way to keep motivated because usually things will work out. Because no matter what, like if it's self-directed, you're gonna invariably create new opportunities just by engaging in it, right? You're gonna talk to people, you're gonna create things. Something's gonna come from it. It might not be what you thought, it might not necessarily be what you wanted, but there will be opportunities that come from it. And so I think looking at it that way too is also important. Like, we might not know what the end is going to necessarily be, but we can be optimistic that something positive will come from it, at least from past experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
That helps. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough because I think so many people, well, I mean, we both went through this too with our careers, like getting into something that we thought was right, but really wasn't right for us, Or because, and it's hard because I think sometimes things change too. It's not even that you don't fit anymore, but that the things changed and so it doesn't fit you anymore. Does that make sense? Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Totally.
So it's like you don't always know what's going to happen either. Then I think that's also what the Stoics are talking about is like a successful life is like knowing yourself well enough too to also make those decisions and make the correct course adjustments as you go, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then also like you know how they mentioned like you ruin it for the other actors and for the people who are watching? Because like the Stoics had this big concept of like the cosmopolis and like you not only owe
Oh
it
yeah.
to yourself, but you owe it to everyone else because we're all part of this one nature and thing like that. So like kind of when you think about it that way, it takes away it actually, yeah, I think it kind of takes away some of the responsibility of saying no because all of a sudden you realize that your no is actually beneficial for other people too. It doesn't feel as selfish.
Well, when you say no, right, you leave an opening for somebody else to step in, you know? Your no could also be like depends on, the no could be like, I'm not gonna do this, but I'll consult or something. It could be like partial help, whatever. There's a lot of ways we can help, right? I like that
Mm-hmm.
too, because they did have that. There is that like quasi-consequentialist sort of attitude because they are focused on like the greater good and the community and the recognition that like, it's not just me in the world, right? It's this whole community and it functions together. Like these opportunities exist because many people are doing things, right? And so taking it away is kind of unfair to others.
Yeah, I was watching something, I think it was on YouTube or somewhere, but it was talking about Marcus Aurelius and how he was the emperor of Rome. And, they had like, I don't know, tens of thousands of citizens and then hundreds of thousands of slaves, but like they thought that Rome was literally the entire world. And I was like, how naive. And then
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, wait, hang on. Us humans think the earth is the only world.
Yeah.
I'm like, how naive.
I know it's funny, like our perception on size has changed, but not really. At the end of the day,
Mhm.
we're still very narrow. Like, I don't think we can help it though. It's hard. We only
Oh,
have
man.
a short life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Reading science fiction has definitely been helpful for that. Like, oh,
Oh God,
man.
yeah. That does help. It gives you a big sense of like the universe and all, and like just the distances involved are just insane.
Cool.
But
So, Mhm.
oh, okay. Oh, I was gonna say, I think that's part of it though. I think it's just like for the Stoics, it's like really like a big part of that character development is understanding ourselves and knowing how that also like what we can do and our responsibilities can play into everything else around us, right? And so like that also means knowing your limits. And I think that's really important, but something that's really hard nowadays with the grind culture, the hustling, you know, working your ass off without knowing you're getting anything paid out from it, right? Like it's difficult. So it is about, it's like always that struggle with human life of picking and choosing and trying to pick the right things, right? To make it work.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's no end to intelligence-based work. So, like, unless you impose it on yourself, it's never going to end.
Yeah. I mean, that's always the thing I always used to struggle with. It's like a written work can always be improved upon, right? Like content that you create can always be made better. So like that's the other hard thing is like you have to have those limits of this is good and I move on. Otherwise you never get anything done either. I used to struggle with
Yeah.
that all the time with perfectionism, right? And like just not getting things done because you couldn't, it's like it's a limitation you place on yourself.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anything else on this topic you want to mention?
No, I think that's good.
All right, there you have it. Why you shouldn't try. Just, you know, well, try a little bit, but not,
Try a little bit,
don't be a
not too
try
much.
hard.
Yeah, don't overdo it.
Yeah.
Don't sign up
Well,
for things you can't do,
yeah,
basically,
exactly. That's good
right?
advice. Yeah. So if you enjoyed the episode, like it, share, subscribe, give us a positive review. That's always helpful. This is the Existential Stoic Podcast. We'll catch you next time. I'm Randy. That's Danny. I'll see you later, Danny.
Later, Randy.